Welcome back, everyone. Today I'm going to use the AI to break down complex things like politics without any biases or emotions or any of that sugarcoating. And you know how ChatGPT is always super careful and polite, right? Well, it always tries to find the good, offer different perspectives, and really just give vague answers. But today, there's not going to be any room for compliments, and you won't hear a single good word out of it. Because I asked AI to rank the top 10 worst presidents of the United States of all time, criticize their policies, explain why they ended up where they are on the list, and of course, finally give us the name of, well, the winner? But yeah, as these presidents, intentionally or not, were trying to destroy the country, ChatGPT is going to destroy them today. But before we get into all of that, take a moment to subscribe to the channel because it helps to boost the video and get more eyes on it, especially if you subscribe while you're watching. And if you don't agree with the AI's decision, let me know in the comments below who would be on your own list of the worst presidents, or at least the 5 that immediately come to mind. Now, without further ado, let's get right into it. First, I'll explain how this is going to work. I'm going to ask ChatGPT to create its own list of the top 10 worst presidents and send them to me one by one, starting with 10th place, of course. But instead of just pulling some random old list off the internet, it's going to analyze each president individually and decide who truly deserves to be on the list. It's going to justify each position and explain why it placed each president where it did, and I'll ask it not to be polite, but rather clear and straightforward. And most importantly, it has to stay unbiased with no left or right-leaning takes. This is key, so I'll put special emphasis on that. Without waiting any longer, let's get right into it. As you can see, I'm typing out everything I just explained, so now let's find out who ChatGPT places in 10th position for the worst presidents of the United States of all time, and here's the first name. Number 10, George W. Bush. Bush's presidency was defined by 2 massive blunders, the Iraq War and the 2008 financial crisis. The invasion of Iraq based on false claims of weapons and mass destruction led to a costly and prolonged war that destabilized the Middle East. His administration's slow and inadequate response to Hurricane Katrina was another low point, making the government seem completely out of touch with the suffering of its own citizens. Add to that the 2008 economic meltdown, and Bush's legacy is one of war and economic collapse. Why 10th place? While Bush's presidency saw some devastating outcomes, his decisions didn't completely undermine the stability of the nation. His spot at 10th reflects a presidency defined by costly miscalculations, without the total breakdown of national institutions. Wow, that's amazing. George W. Bush in 10th place? What a strong start. But now let's see who takes the 9th spot. Number 9, Lyndon B. Johnson. Johnson's presidency is often overshadowed by his handling of the Vietnam War. While he did introduce monumental domestic reforms through his Great Society programs and passed significant civil rights legislation, his decision to escalate U.S. involvement in Vietnam turned the conflict into a national disaster. The war became increasingly unpopular, dividing the country and tarnishing his presidency. The financial and human costs of Vietnam weighed heavily on his legacy, despite his domestic success. Why 9th place? Johnson's domestic achievements were significant, but the colossal failure of the Vietnam War overshadows much of his presidency. The war drained resources, divided the country, and eroded faith in government leadership. Oh, well, this seems a little bit strange to me since we've seen LBJ and ChatGPT's ranking of the best presidents before. By the way, that video's already up on the channel, so make sure to check it out after this one. But either way, Lyndon B. Johnson lands in the 9th spot here. Now let's see who's at 8. Number 8, Gerald Ford. Gerald Ford is best remembered for his controversial decision to pardon Richard Nixon after the Watergate scandal, which many saw as an act of corruption or betrayal of justice. This decision significantly damaged Ford's credibility and likely cost him the 1976 election. His presidency also faced economic struggles with rising inflation and unemployment, further undermining his leadership during a challenging period for the country. Why 8th place? Ford's decision to pardon Nixon and his failure to address major economic challenges earned him the 8th spot. His short term in office didn't do lasting damage, but the consequences of his decisions hurt his legacy. Alright, Gerald Ford takes 8th place, but let's not waste any time and move on to number 7. Number 7, Jimmy Carter. Carter's presidency was defined by economic stagnation with high inflation, high unemployment, and an energy crisis. Despite his good intentions, Carter was often seen as an ineffective leader, unable to navigate the economic turmoil or provide strong leadership. His administration was further weakened by the Iran hostage crisis, which lasted 444 days and highlighted his perceived lack of decisiveness on the global stage. Though Carter had notable humanitarian efforts after his presidency, his time in office was widely regarded as a failure in managing the nation's problems. Why 7th place? While Carter's presidency was plagued by economic troubles and foreign policy failures, it wasn't marked by corruption or scandals. His well-meaning but ineffective leadership places him in 7th. So, in short, high inflation, unemployment, and the energy crisis put Jimmy Carter in 7th place on the list. Let's see who it does at number 6. Number 6. Donald J. Trump. Trump's presidency was marked by chaos, division, and scandal. He became the first president to be impeached twice, once for abuse of power, pressuring Ukraine to investigate a political rival, and again for incitement of insurrection following the January 6 Capitol riot. His administration's handling of the COVID-19 pandemic was widely criticized, with delayed responses and misinformation leading to thousands of preventable deaths. Trump's repeated attacks on democratic norms, his refusal to accept the results of the 2020 election, and his polarizing leadership left the nation deeply divided. Why 6th place? Trump's presidency left lasting damage on political discourse and public trust in government. His actions and rhetoric created instability and division, securing him a spot in the top 6. Oh, and he also hates Taylor Swift, which is not exactly great. Well, thanks for all the dislikes. Thank you, ChatGPT. You saw the whole conversation and how I specifically asked it to be unbiased, so let's make this clear. Donald Trump takes the 6th place on the list of the worst U.S. presidents according to AI. Now it's asking if I'm ready for the next one. Well, definitely yes, and here it is. Number 5. Herbert Hoover. Hoover's presidency is best known for his disastrous handling of the Great Depression. His refusal to provide direct aid to struggling Americans, combined with his belief in limited government intervention, exacerbated the economic crisis. Hoover's policies led to widespread unemployment and poverty, with millions of Americans suffering while he failed to take decisive action. His presidency became a symbol of inaction during one of the darkest times in American history. Why 5th place? Hoover's inability to effectively address the Great Depression caused tremendous hardship for millions, placing him in the top 5. His lack of action at a crucial time for the country leaves a lasting stain on his legacy. Well, alright, Herbert Hoover makes it into the top 5. Now let's move on to 4th. Number 4. Warren G. Harding. Harding's presidency is infamous for rampant corruption. His administration was riddled with scandals, the most notorious being the Teapot Dome scandal, in which officials took bribes for oil leases. Harding appointed close friends and political allies, known as the Ohio Gang, to key positions, many of whom used their roles for personal gain. While Harding himself wasn't directly involved in the scandals, his inability to control his administration left a legacy of dishonesty and greed. Why 4th place? Harding's presidency epitomizes governmental corruption and incompetence. Although his term was short, the damage done to the public trust places him solidly in the top 4. The rampant corruption puts Warren G. Harding in the well-deserved 4th spot on the list of worst presidents of all time. You know, time flies and we're speeding toward the top 3, but before I reveal who's at number 3, it's a great time to hit that like button or even dislike if you disagree with the positions, which I'm sure some of you do. It's super easy and it only takes a couple of seconds. And by the way, I've got an entire playlist of videos where I ask the AI different things like predictions of election winners, what it would do if it became president itself, and of course, the ranking of the top 10 best presidents of all time. So be sure to check that out after this. Now, with all of that being said, let's get on to the top 3. And coming in at the number 3 spot is Number 3. Richard Nixon. Nixon's presidency was defined by the Watergate scandal, where his involvement in a break-in at the Democratic National Committee headquarters and the subsequent cover-up led to his downfall. Watergate wasn't just a political scandal, it eroded public trust in the presidency and created a constitutional crisis. Nixon's abuse of power and attempts to obstruct justice led him to becoming the only U.S. president to resign in disgrace. Despite some foreign policy achievements, his legacy is forever tarnished by Watergate. Why 3rd place? Nixon's abuse of power and the corruption surrounding his administration placed the integrity of the presidency at risk, earning him a spot in the top 3 worst presidents. Alright, got it. Richard Nixon, with his Watergate scandal, lands in the 3rd spot. Let's see who's at number 2. Number 2, Andrew Johnson. Johnson, who took office after Lincoln's assassination, is remembered for his disastrous handling of Reconstruction. His leniency toward the South and opposition to granting rights to freed slaves undermined the efforts to rebuild the nation after the Civil War. Johnson vetoed civil rights legislation and clashed with Congress, leading to his impeachment, the first president to be impeached. His failure to unite the country and his resistance to progress deeply damaged the post-war healing process. Why 2nd place? Johnson's actions set back civil rights and divided the country at a time when it needed unity most. His legacy is one of missed opportunities and deepening national wounds. The first president to be impeached and now the 2nd worst president of all time. Andrew Johnson takes 2nd place. But now, let's find out who was the absolute worst president in US history, and here's the name. Number 1, James Buchanan. Buchanan's presidency wasn't just a failure, it was an unmitigated disaster. As the country edged closer to collapse, Buchanan refused to lift a finger to stop the chaos. His passive, cowardly stance on secession allowed the southern states to leave the Union unopposed, setting the stage for the Civil War. Buchanan's inability to act when the nation needed a leader most makes him one of the most spineless and ineffective figures to ever occupy the White House. Rather than confronting the issue of slavery head-on, he hid behind weak excuses, watching as the nation he was sworn to protect fell apart before his eyes. His neglect and outright incompetence directly led to the deaths of hundreds of thousands of Americans during the Civil War. Why 1st place? Buchanan's catastrophic inaction and utter failure to preserve the Union make him the most irresponsible, disastrous, and destructive president in US history. He didn't just fail, he actively allowed the country to descend into chaos, forever cementing his place as the worst president of all time. Wow, that was brutal. I asked ChatGPT to be straightforward, but that was rough. No doubt about it though, ChatGPT made its decision. James Buchanan takes the top spot as the absolute worst president of the United States of all time. Well, congratulations, I guess. But what do you think about these rankings? Do you agree or disagree with the positions? And if not, be sure to drop your own top picks in the comments down below. Right after that, click on this video where I ask AI to rank the top 10 best presidents of all time, and trust me, you're going to be surprised. Thanks for watching, we're done here. Go ahead and click on that video and let's head over there together.